This painting may appear peaceful at first glance, but the longer you look, the harder it becomes to believe that everything here is as calm as it seems. We enter the scene with a young woman floating gently in a quiet stream, surrounded by flowers and overgrown plants. But wait a minute. Is the woman in this image as peaceful as she inherently looks? Or could we be witnessing something worse? This is Ophelia, painted in 1852 by John Everett Millais. This is a story about loss, tragic love, and a young woman whose life seemed to be surrounded by sadness. It is set in a Victorian era among a rebellious group of young artists who wanted to change the world of art. It is also the story of a model whose life slowly became entangled with the men who painted her. And strangely, it is also the story of a grave that was disturbed 7 years after it was sealed, opened again in the dead of night to recover a book of forbidden love poems that had been buried with the dead. A story of beauty, obsession, love, and the quiet tragedy that sometimes hides between the great works of art. Her gaze looks up at the sky while her hands rest beside her, almost as if she is surrendering to the current. Her expression is strangely calm, but also distant, as though she is no longer fully present. Her lips are relaxed, but they also appear to be in a sad state, and I find myself wondering whether she is taking a breath, whispering, or surrendering to silence. The young woman in this painting comes from the tragedy Hamlet, written by William Shakespeare. In the story, Ophelia is a young noblewoman who falls deeply in love with Prince Hamlet. But as Hamlet descends into anger and madness, he begins to reject her. When Hamlet mistakenly kills her father, Polonius, the loss shatters her completely. According to the queen, Gertrude, Ophelia later wanders to a river while gathering flowers. She slips into the water and slowly drowns, her garments spreading across the surface before pulling her beneath. It is this fragile moment between beauty and death that John Everett Millais chose to immortalize. Whether suicide or the final surrender, too wounded to resist, her drowning feels tragically passive. Her beauty suggests life, yet her stillness suggests something else entirely. It is the face of someone who has been left behind, who was ignored, forgotten, abandoned, and left to drift into herself. Her gaze does not search for rescue. It does not resist, as though she has already accepted her fate. This is John's view of Hamlet's Ophelia. Sadness, melancholy, and emotional fragility. The painter. John Everett Millais was a child prodigy who by age 11 was the youngest student to be accepted to the Royal Arts Academy. The painter John Everett was 21 years old by 1851 when he traveled to Ewell. Millais spent 5 months painting the landscape for Ophelia. During this time, John Everett was going through emotional nostalgia, spiritual moodiness, and an obsession with painting. At the time, John had a blooming social life, and while in Ewell, John ran into his ex-teenage lover from when he was age 17. He later wrote in his diary that his love had married a man who was old enough to be her father, but still attempted to look her age. He was emotionally hurt and said, he wished myself anywhere but there, when he had to call his lover Mrs. B instead of Fanny. The woman in the painting who modeled for John Everett is Elizabeth Siddal. Elizabeth's life is often described as tragic. The last decade of her life she lived with chronic illness, addiction, a turbulent love, loss, and an ultimate death at the young age of 32. Elizabeth first came into the art scene as a model when she met Walter Devereux in 1849. He saw Elizabeth as being uniquely beautiful and described her as the most beautiful creature with golden, coppery hair. The details are murky, but the most popular belief is that Walter Devereux met her while she was working at a hattery shop and was struck by her beauty. Another account states that she met Walter Devereux's family to assist in a dress fitting, and it was there that she showed her drawings to Walter Devereux's father, who was the principal at the Government School of Design. Elizabeth modeled for Walter Devereux's 12th night. It was during that time she met John Everett. Elizabeth Siddal was not considered a conventional beauty for Victorian times. Victorian beauty standards often favored delicate, submissive, and often blonde features. Siddal was admired by the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood for her dramatic nymph-like features and pale skin with fiery red hair. While some would have regarded her as useful rather than beautiful, the artist did favor her unique look, which was considered ahead of its time. Elizabeth was struck with consumption due to getting terribly sick with pneumonia when she was modeling for John Everett's Ophelia. John Everett had her pose in a tub filled with water, wearing a white gown for months. It was when John Everett was near the end of the painting that he became so focused that he didn't notice the candles under the tub that kept the water warm had burnt out. Elizabeth stayed in the water, striving to be a professional and not disturb John. It was rumored that she never fully recovered and was prone to pneumonia and chronic respiratory illness for the rest of her life. Her father was so upset by what John Everett did that he sent him a letter demanding 50 pounds for medical expenses, roughly $4,000 to $5,000 today. He settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. While the story of her getting pneumonia while modeling for John Ophelia is famous, it is only the beginning and a small part of her health afflictions. It was said that Elizabeth not only suffered from a respiratory illness, but it was probably exacerbated by an eating disorder, as it was rumored that she suffered from anorexia. Also, chronic depression and paranoia, which likely exacerbated all the other afflictions when she eventually succumbed to her addiction. Elizabeth tried to alleviate her issues, which was most likely tuberculosis, with the medication laudanum, a mix of opium and alcohol. At the time, it was a common cure-all pain for nerves and female hysteria. It was said that during her pregnancy, which ended in a miscarriage, she was consuming large amounts of laudanum. Her addiction only grew after her loss, as she struggled even more with depression and her husband's infidelity. During Elizabeth's time as a model, she took the opportunity to dive more into her creative side, with focusing more on her own drawings, paintings, and poems. Dante Gabriel Rossetti, her husband, had become her primary teacher, and she eventually became the only woman to exhibit at the 1857 Pre-Raphaelite exhibition. The most influential art critic of the era, John Ruskin was so impressed by her talent that he provided her with an annual stipend of £150. None of her poems were ever published while she was alive. She reportedly wrote in secret or shared them only with close associates. It was not until the 20th century that historians began to fully rebuild her reputation as an artist. On February 10th, 1862, her husband and Elizabeth went out for dinner to meet a friend. After returning home, Gabriel left again at 8 p.m. to teach his night class. When he returned, he saw Elizabeth in a comatose state. The bottle of laudanum, which was half full, was now completely empty. In a frantic state, he attempted to call as many doctors as he could. 4 came to try and revive Elizabeth. They used a stomach pump and various methods all night, but none were able to revive her. She was pronounced dead at 7:20 a.m. the next morning. According to various accounts, it was said a note was allegedly found near Siddal, which was written by her. The message reportedly said, "Please look after Harry." Harry was her invalid brother, who may have had a slight intellectual disability. Upon finding the note, Gabriel snatched up the paper, went to his close friend, Ford Maddox Brown, who reportedly instructed him to burn the note in order to avoid the stigma of suicide, as at the time it was considered both illegal and a grave sin and could have resulted in the denial of a Christian burial. After her death, her husband reacted with intense grief, guilt, and obsession. In a state of overwhelming sadness, he decided to bury Elizabeth with the only copy he had of love poems he had written to her during her times of illness. He then developed his own addiction to chloral hydrate, a powerful synthetic sedative and hallucinogenic, which only caused him more pain. 7 years later, in 1869, his desire for fame overcame his sadness, and his friend Charles Augustus Howell convinced him to have the body exhumed so that he could retrieve the poems. The poems that was said that he buried within her long coppery hair. Gabriel did not attend the exhumation, as the thought of it haunted him. Gabriel continued to paint Elizabeth through his memory even long after her death. And now, without further delay, the painting and the analysis. Her dress looks heavy and of high value for the times, almost submerged completely, delicate and intentional. The flowers she once held now drift away from her hands, almost like a wedding bouquet, symbolizing celebration or devotion. The flowers in her hair appear soft and childlike, evoking innocence, youth. Her hands, she holds flowers that are still vibrant and colorful. They feel like symbols of hope, of love, of intention. Her hands themselves appear positioned almost like prayer. There is surrender in that gesture. No struggle, not fear, but acceptance. The water around her appears almost dark, black like soil. Her hair spread outward, blending into the water as though she is slowly becoming part of it. The willow tree, still rooted, symbolizes forsaken or rejected love. The broken branch specifically symbolizes a life cut short. The nettles represent pain. Violets around her neck symbolize faithfulness and chastity. The white roses symbolizing youth and beauty. Forget-me-nots represent devotion. Purple loosestrife represents the long purples mentioned in the play and can represent death. Daisies symbolize innocence, sadness, or grief. Crowflowers floating near her fingers symbolize ingratitude or childishness. Pansies that float over her dress and legs represent love in vain. Finally, the poppies symbolize death and sleep. Together, the plants transition from rooted life to floating separation to sinking death, visually manifesting the movement from innocence and devotion to loss, abandonment, and mortality. The flowers surrounding her dress seem to exist in different states. Some float freely on the surface, still belonging to the world above. Others are partially submerged, as though they have surrendered completely. As my attention moves outward, the foliage becomes overwhelming in its abundance. Nature does not pause, it does not mourn, it continues to grow. When I look toward the left side of the painting, the foliage feels harsher and more jagged. The plants beneath the willow tree feel sharp and aggressive. The willow itself is bent and unstable. It appears fragile, as though it too has succumbed to the same force pulling her downward. And yet, along the lower edge of her figure, the flowers begin to resemble bedding, a soft foundation beneath her. It almost feels like a peaceful resting place. The tones echo each other in a way that feels intentional. Her dress itself appears golden in places, almost magical, luminous. It reminds me of something mythological, almost mermaid-like, as though she belongs to both land and water, yet fully to neither. On the left side of the painting, there is a red robin that is almost unnoticeable. It is the only other living being in the painting. In mid-19th century Europe, the red robin was seen as a sacred bird. Folklore in Victorian time was that a robin tried to pull a thorn from Jesus' crown of thorns during crucifixion. His blood stained its feathers, making it forever red. The robin was seen as being gentle, mournful, and deeply spiritual, watching over innocent loved ones. However, the biological reality of the red robin differs. Robins are known to be highly territorial, deathly aggressive, especially towards other intruding robins. Their sweet melody is often a fierce declaration of ownership. Similar to Ophelia's song, it may be beautiful, but the melody could be interpreted as a song of distress and a broken mind. The robin sits in the branches calmly watching over Ophelia, either in indifference or as a mourning spirit. The bird doesn't disturb Ophelia, it just waits, possibly waiting for worms or insects. His presence reinforces something profound. The world does not stop. Nature does not pause. Even in the presence of disappearance, life continues. During the Victorian era, death, beauty, and faith were deeply present in society and art. It shows not just a person, but an emotional state. She is not fighting, she is simply drifting. And in that quiet surrender, she becomes part of everything around her, no longer separate from nature, but carried, dissolved, and remembered by it.